Hey everybody, ZedBelinsky here. How's everybody doing? It's December in the year 2017, and I'd like to thank you for joining me in my first ever podcast. This podcast will consist of me rambling about horror-related things, so if that's what you enjoy, then you're in good company. Perhaps you're listening to this on the commute to or from work. That's what I usually do when I listen to podcasts. Or maybe you're lying in bed, winding down after a long day and looking for a voice in the darkness. Or maybe you're simply sitting at home in solitude looking for a friend. Wherever you may be, I'm delighted that you decided to join me tonight. Let me start this off by telling you a little bit about myself. My favorite authors are probably Stephen King or Edgar Allan Poe if I'm feeling classic. And my favorite scary movies are The Conjuring and The Ring. Now I know what you're thinking, oh, The Conjuring's overrated, blah blah blah, but I saw it when it first came out in theaters, and it was a pretty immersive experience. Trust me, horror movies are 10 times better if you watch them in a movie theater. You don't have the distraction of your phone, your surrounding environment, and things along those lines. You can fully immerse yourself in the theater, which is an experience in and of itself. I know that when I'm watching Netflix or something, I tend to focus on my phone instead, but in the movie theater, you can't use your phone, so it gets rid of that problem. So there's that bit. And The Ring is my other favorite movie because it was the first movie I saw that scared the daylight out of me. It was actually the first scary movie I saw, period. I was young, and I was staying at a friend's house. I was a real scaredy cat as a kid. Dogs scared me, the dark scared me, hell, even birds taking off scared me. So picture this timid young boy who was afraid of everything get convinced by his friend to watch a scary movie. Truth be told, I didn't make it to the end. I left his room before the final scene. Well, once my friend calmed me down, he told me that he had turned off the movie and that we could go find something else to do. So I walked back into the room and he paused the last scene where you see the face of the dead guy. Well, seeing that face resulted in many sleepless nights, constantly imagining my closet door opening in the dead of night and out come crawling an evil spirit from a well. Since that day, my fascination with horror grew. Cue freshman year of high school, my English class did a thing where classmates would suggest books. One kid suggested The Stand by Stephen King. His description of the book piqued my interest. So I went over to the library, checked it out, and ended up loving it. That's how I discovered the world of Stephen King, and that's why he's my favorite author. His writing is just brilliant, and his imagery is fantastic. But in my experience, I would much prefer to read a scary story than watch it on screen. That way the imagery is up to the reader, not to the director. If you haven't checked out famous horror novels, I suggest doing so. It'll change your perspective. My most recent book I just finished was Nosferatu by Joe Hill, which was pretty good. The title is clever because it's a picture of a vanity license plate inscribed with NOS 482, which spells Nosferatu, which partially suggests what it's about. The book was more of a thriller than a horror, but it definitely had some scary parts. Let me read you a quick summary from Tor.com, and I promise there are no spoilers. Nestled high in the mountains of central Colorado is a house of death with a hidden door to another world, Christmasland. It is a fantasy realm accessible only through the psychotic mind of Charles Manx and his malevolent wraith, a 1938 Rolls-Royce with the vanity plate NOS 482. Charlie Manx lives for amusement and loves children, or more accurately, loves their innocence and unconditional admiration, so boundlessly that everything else is drained away. Far away in Massachusetts lives a 12-year-old girl named Victoria McQueen, jokingly called the Brat by her father. Her Raleigh Tough Burner is her version of her wraith, and she uses it to traverse across her private real/not real bridge to find lost things. In rural Iowa, a punky librarian named Maggie uses her special Scrabble tiles to divine answers from the universe. All of these people can tap into their own personal inscape, a place between reality and truth, a place built by and contained within their own imaginations, a place that reflects the personality of its creators. At first glance, it's hard to see how the pieces fit together. Nosferatu is broken into several volumes, each full of a bunch of chapters that exist in different eras, locations, and populations. Gradually, the puzzle begins to fill in, and the bonds between the seemingly unconnected characters develop and tighten. Vic and her bridge and Maggie and her tiles fall into orbit around Manx and his wraith, and it's only a matter of time before they collide. Vic and Manx do battle several times, each more catastrophic. Let me go ahead and add some things here. This book is good to read around this time because it's laced with Christmas themes. Who doesn't love Christmas time? Also, Charlie Manx doesn't sexually abuse the kids in the book, although there may or may not be some rape scenes. Trigger warnings have been issued. Also, if you weren't aware of this, Joe Hill is indeed Stephen King's son. He just writes under a pen name. But his works are pretty good, and they reference his father several times, which is also pretty neat. So there you have it. You now know my two favorite horror movies and the first horror book I read. Not only because they were scary, but because there's a story behind each and every one of them. I also told you the latest book I read, and if you're interested in that, go check it out. If you're not much of a reader, I highly recommend it. Now, let's get to talking about spooky, real-life experiences. I post the stories that I write on Reddit, but unfortunately, most of them are not true. Sorry, guys. There is one experience that I will share with you tonight. This one happened to me a few years ago, back when I was into urban exploring. Without getting into too much detail as to where I'm from, let me fill you in on some of the places I've explored. Let's see here. There's the Housatonic Tunnel in Florida, Massachusetts, which is a known haunted location. The Hudson River State Hospital in the Hudson Valley of New York State, which is an abandoned insane asylum, The S.K. Pierce Mansion in Gardner, Massachusetts. Jewett City in Griswold, Connecticut, home of the Jewett City Vampires, to name a few. These are all real places with strange histories, and they're all rather unsettling. Now, before I go further, I just want to make a quick PSA to those thinking about urban exploring. If you're not sure whether or not what you're doing is legal, contact the local police and give them a heads up that you'll be on the property. Mention that you're a photographer instead of an urban explorer. It sounds better to them that way. Or, if you're feeling bold, you can go ahead and show up without notifying anyone. It makes it more interesting when the police discover your body. That being said, my scariest experience happened in Goshen, New York. A group of friends and I decided to visit the infamous Nathaniel White murder house. We were young, thrill seekers who got more than what we bargained for. I will never forget that night. Before I get started, let me read you the information pertaining to the murder house. I'll post a link to the website on YouTube and Twitter. This is what it says. April 23rd, 1922 marks the beginning of a dark time for the region surrounding Middletown, New York, and an era of questions regarding New York's ability to keep its own populace safe. It's the date that Nathaniel White was released on parole. 13 months earlier, in March of 1991, the corpse of a woman later identified as Juliana Frank was discovered along a set of railway tracks leading through Middletown, New York. She had been stabbed multiple times to her chest and neck, her corpse neatly posed into that of a restful sleep, akin to what one might expect to see at a funeral. She was pregnant with her third child at the time she was killed. Lorette Huggins Riviere was a mother of 3, and employee of the Middletown Blue Cross Blue Shield. Her body was found beaten, stabbed, and strangled in her Middletown home on July 10, 1992. Investigators noticed that the crime scene at the Riviere residence bore a haunting resemblance to the unsolved murder from the tracks just over a year earlier. Lorette's small home was filled with boxes and crates, which she had been packing her possessions into. In August, she had planned to relocate back to her native homeland in the Caribbean. One of her sons was already there, awaiting his mother who would never arrive. Over 40 miles away, cousins Angelina Hopkins and Brenda Whiteside were spending the evening of July 20th at the Blue Note Tavern in Poughkeepsie, New York. They were last seen leaving the bar together with a few other men who were regular patrons. Brenda was 20. Angela was 23 and had a 7-month-old son. Neither were heard from again. On July 30th, a corpse was discovered amongst the burned debris which once made the Hillcrest Manor restaurant in Goshen, New York. The body was clearly the victim of a murder, made obvious by the multiple stab wounds. Distraught relatives later identified the victim as 27-year-old Adrienne Hunter of Middletown. Christine M. Klebb was a young niece to Jill Garrison, who was dating the recently released Nathaniel White. Christine was 14, just graduated from 8th grade, and was looking forward to the summer break before her first year of high school. She had gone missing on June 29th, and her family reported her absence to the police on July 1st. Nathaniel White confronted family members a few days later at their 4th of July picnic. 1 month later, Christine Klebb's lifeless form was found on the side of Echo Lake Road in Goshen, New York. By this point, police had already come to the sobering realization that they may well be up against a serial killer. There were already 4 different police departments involved in the case, but the investigation was a steep uphill fight for them. Not only was there precious little evidence left at the crime scenes, there was also an utter lack of eyewitness testimony. Enter the family of Angelina Hopkins, one of the missing women last seen at the Blue Note Tavern. Her mother, Anna Teresa Hopkins, along with her sister, Cecilia Hopkins, staked out the bar where Angelina was last seen. They knew that Angelina had left with one of the regulars of the place and were intent to find out who he was. After 2 weeks of visiting the tavern, they finally met up with one of the regular patrons who was last seen with Angelina. They strike up a conversation with this gentleman, and after a short while he volunteers his name, Nate White. The family quickly turned this information over to the police. Within 24 hours, White is brought into custody. Within 48 hours, he had confessed to 6 murders, including that of Juliana Frank, who he had murdered after being convicted of an earlier crime, but before he started his prison sentence, the same sentence which he was later paroled from on good behavior, which was in April 23, 1992. He also told police where to find the bodies of the 2 women who had gone missing from the bar. They were hidden away in an abandoned farmhouse in Goshen, New York. Now, this is the farmhouse that my friends and I would visit at a later date. White was charged with 6 counts of second-degree murder, to which he pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity. The following is a direct quote from Nathaniel White on his reasoning behind his first murder, claiming it to have been inspired by the film RoboCop 2. The first girl I killed was from a RoboCop movie. I seen him cut somebody's throat, then take the knife and slit down the chest to the stomach and left the body in a certain position. With the first person I killed, I did exactly what I saw in the movie. White was found guilty on all counts on April 14, 1993, and was sentenced to 150 years to life in prison. He began serving his sentence at Great Meadow Correctional Facility on May 27, 1993. That reminds me, movies don't make people violent, they just make the violent people more creative. You see? Anyways, it's time to tell you about my experience on the Nathaniel White murder house. So, here goes. There was a group of 4 of us, and for whatever reason, we thought it would be a good idea to bring a Ouija board. Maybe because 3 out of 4 of us didn't believe in that sort of thing. We arrived close to midnight and decided to split up into 2 groups and scout out the area. There was a huge swamp in the backyard, literally something like straight out of a horror movie. This is presumably where he may have drowned some of his victims. After meeting up for the first time, we noticed a handprint on my buddy's Jeep window. We figured it was just one of us, so no big deal. We split up again, one group to check out the area around the basement and the other one around the swamp, trying to find a way into the house. My buddy and I approached the basement, and we heard the typical creaks and strange sounds coming from the house, but it was enough to shrug off as being old and ill-maintained. The second time we met up at the Jeep, there were more handprints. This was weird because none of us were around the vehicle to make them. Now, a little freaked out, we decided splitting up was a terrible idea, so we decided to enter the house together. We entered the house through one of the windows. It was as creepy as you might have expected. We explored the house until we came to the scary-looking attic, where he presumably kept some of his victims. Now, despite the fact that my friend brought a new HD video camera, and it was working perfectly the whole night, it could not focus on anything on the attic. Whatever. We kept moving. Outside in the back of the house, around the swamp, there was a large barn. In there, we found some chicken coops, a couch, normal-looking things, until we looked up and saw a giant cleaver hanging from the chain over our heads. Again, my friend's camera could not focus on that thing. We go back to the Jeep a 3rd time. More handprints. But that's impossible. We were all together. 2 of the guys are begging to leave at this point, but we eventually decide to stay a bit longer. Then bust out the Ouija board. Now, before this story continues, you need to know about my friend. Let's call him John. He's fearless when it comes to this stuff. I've seen him run through abandoned schools by himself without a flashlight. So he tells me I've got a bad feeling about this, and I tell him too bad, and we all sat down in the living room around the board. At the time, it didn't register that this was the first time this kid ever showed fear. Like, ever. Inside the house, one guy is standing near the door, the other by the window, and John and I were actually using the board. About 15 seconds in, there were what sounded like light footsteps walking across the front porch outside. Maybe we were all a little too scared to move, so we sat there for another minute or so. Next thing I know, I swear it sounded like an NFL linebacker just charged across the porch and slammed into the front door. We ran so fast we left the board sitting there in the house. So there you have it. That's my experience with the paranormal. These days I've grown wiser and I don't really go looking for trouble. It's more of I'll mind my own business and you mind your own business, because you don't really know what's out there. You don't know if you're going to invite a dangerous or malevolent spirit into your life, and that's not something you want, because it's a painful process to get rid of. So for those of you who do dabble in the paranormal and contact with the spirit world, just be careful, because you never know what can follow you home. As for the murder house, some nitwit burned it down last year, so if you're planning on visiting it, well, I just saved you a trip. It's unfortunate, but you can still find videos on YouTube and pictures online, but it's not the same. When you go to a place with history, whether the history is good or bad, you can just feel the energy surrounding the place. For example, this area in Goshen, there's a lake, and I swear it's just windy there all the time. You just feel the chilling breeze from the lake whipping in your face and through the open windows of the house, and I don't know, it's not quite right. So I believe that proper introductions have been made. Thanks for sticking it out with me on this first episode. Before I go, I'd like to hear from you. What's your favorite scary movie? What's your favorite scary book? What's the scariest thing that's ever happened to you? I want to hear all about it. So go ahead and email me at ZedBelinsky@gmail.com. I'll provide a link to my email in the description below. And if you want to hear more stuff like this, I'll be posting more podcasts in the future. So stay tuned, hit the subscribe button, and have a good night.